You're going to love this one. Jordan Peterson's intellect paired with a well-placed sarcasm can say a lot in just a few words, and I think that's exactly what we saw when he went head-to-head with an ABC journalist over the Marxist soul being breathed into many of Australia's public and private policies. Take a look at this next clip before I tell you how.
I want to stop being a pathetic weasel.
Yeah, that would be good. Are you a pathetic weasel?
Well, I'd like
You seem to be doing all right.
I'm doing fine.
Yeah, well, so you're not as pathetic as you might be.
Rule 1 is stand up straight with your shoulders back.
Yeah.
I have terrible posture.
Yeah, it's not so bad. No, maybe you have a good tailor and he's like shouldered up your suit nicely.
Are you flirting with me, Dr. Peterson?
Well, not intentionally.
Oh,
you are
my.
very attractive, though.
I feel so great. I'm 28 years old, I can't cook.
Yeah.
I tried to quit smoking about 6 times, rarely exercise,
Yeah.
regularly use recreational drugs.
Yeah.
I'm a vegetarian who ordered butter chicken on the weekend.
Oh, yeah.
Haven't been in a relationship that lasted longer than a year since 2011. Hate my job. Never remember anyone's birthday. Still renting. Don't know what Bitcoin is. Haven't read a full book since 2012,
Yeah.
including yours.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Oh, if I would have known that, I would have never showed up for the interview.
Which part? Which
Oh,
part
the whole
disgusts
thing.
you
It's
the
just a
most?
mess.
Weasel,
It is.
pathetic weasel.
Yeah.
Back
There's
to
no
back.
excuse. There's no hope for you, I'm afraid.
You're big on people cleaning their room.
Clean up your room.
I don't know how you can go out and protest the structure of the entire economic system if you can't keep your room organized.
I don't clean my room, but I do pay someone to clean my room. Does that still count?
Yeah, well, it's a metaphor, obviously, and the thing is, it's not that easy to put your room in order. It actually requires a lot of thought. You have to think about your closet, all right? What should you be wearing? Where are you going to put everything? You have to think about how you want your room organized so that you can do whatever it is that you want to do in there, so that the room compels that, or at least allows it to happen. And if you do it right, you learn a lot. And the thing that's interesting about it is you can actually do it. Most people have a room. It's like, there's a place to start, man. It's a little corner of the world that's actually under your control. It's like, see what you can do with it.
What are the limits of that idea, though? Because you can have a lovely clean room, but if for my generation, we're looking down the barrel of climate change, we can't afford a house, some people can't get work, university education's unaffordable. Like, there are these huge, massive problems in society and the political economy that are also going to, screw us over in the big picture that the clean room isn't going to necessarily fix.
If you're going to fix complicated problems, you have to learn how to fix simple problems first. Then you get good at it. I'm not saying that young people don't have things to be concerned about, because life is a concern, right? Life is a fatal disease. It's a concern. You're not on top of it. There's always more challenge than you can take on in some sense. But complaining about the structure of being and attempting to reorganize massive social structures, especially when you don't know the first thing about them, which is generally the case, is just not advisable. And the universities, they teach young kids, young people, 19, 20 years old, that they should be out attempting to rectify massive social organizations. It's like, you wouldn't go and try to fix a cruise ship. Things are complicated. You can't set your own room in order. You can't set your own family, your life in order. What the hell makes you think you're ready to take on something like the political system? That's hard. You're gonna mess it up, man, for sure.
There's a pragmatism in that advice that's enough to humble the young activist types today at college campuses, and you know why? There's actually a tendency for young, educated people who are just beginning to understand the world to start seeing everything wrong with society they think they can fix. And it's that gross overestimation of their abilities which they have before they hit a wall and realize they don't really understand how the complex mechanics of society function. Have you heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect in psychology? Simply put, it's a kind of cognitive bias that makes people who gain a little knowledge and expertise in something believe that they've figured it all out more than anyone else, while in truth you're oblivious to just how much there is they don't know yet and just how many ways their ill-guided actions can go wrong. Isn't that kind of what we see in modern society? And don't you sometimes wonder why modern activism comes mostly from young students rather than old people with experience who probably know a lot more about the political and social problems that exist? Take, for example, one simple fact, which is how often capitalism as an economic system is bashed by young activists who make it the culprit for everything that's wrong with the world they see. A survey from North Dakota State University revealed that just 23% of college students believe capitalism is a positive force, with nearly 40% seeing it as negative, and the rest just being ambivalent. How do you explain something like this when students in the age range of 18 to 25 years old think they understand the incredibly complex economics enough to believe they can even have the informed opinion, much less rebuild those systems? And most of all, it's that exact same system that they benefit from and enjoy every single day, from their education to their smartphones to the food they eat, all coming from intricate supply chains they do not understand. What do you think happens when a naive and charged young student like this goes about trying to tear down the somewhat functioning systems we have in order to rebuild them? Of course, they end up just tearing them down with no knowledge of how to create something else in its place by themselves.
I feel like now's a good time to let you know that the ABC is the home of postmodernism and neo-Marxist thought. And I've just got our equity and diversity plan here.
Oh, hi.
The ABC's equity and diversity plan for 2016 to 2018 has targets of 50% women senior executives and 20% women technologists. Mm-hmm. Is that bad?
Yeah.
Why?
Because the game of dividing human beings up by their group identity ends in disaster, no matter who plays it and no matter what the reasons are. That doesn't mean that, in principle it might, perhaps, who the hell knows? I don't know the internal workings of ABC. Maybe it would be better if 20% of the women were technologists. Maybe it's a radically misogynist organization. I tend to doubt it, but perhaps it is, and perhaps that should be rectified. But these sorts of quotas, they're a terrible idea for 50 different reasons.
What about looking back over history? You've written the idea that women were oppressed throughout history is an appalling theory. They haven't had a great time, though, have they?
Who has had a great time in history?
But men have had less of a
Really?
shitty
Have
time.
they? Have they? By what standard? By what standard?
Well, I'm just saying if you're a woman...
How about war?
But it took longer for women to get the vote, and women belong to their husbands.
There are inequalities in the catastrophes that the genders are subject to. And so, look, first of all, there's some things we got to get straight. History is a rough business. Everybody had it rough. In 1895, the typical Westerner lived on less than $1 a day, which is absolute poverty by today's standards, right? And so people were brutally poor for almost the entire course of human history. It was rough. You say, well, did men or women have it worse? It's like, well, that's a complicated question. But one of the things you can say is everybody had it pretty damn bad. And apart from the pure catastrophe of existence that was shared, say, more or less equally between the genders, like most of the time, men and women helped each other. Like women raised their sons, husbands protected their families. I'm not buying this whole, the sexes have been at each other's throats the entire history of mankind. It's like, no, wrong. And then one level deeper than that, I don't like the whole game. The whole game is, let's divide people into groups and contrast their oppression. It's like, fine, play it, see what happens. You're not going to like it. We did that in the 20th century, right? The right-wingers played it in Nazi Germany, and the left-wingers played it throughout the communist world. And all that happened was that we stacked up the corpses, millions of them. It's not a good game. The equity game, that's a bad game.
Bad game?
Bad game.
You don't want to read this just to be sure?
If it says equity, it's a bad game. Because it means equality of outcome.
Right.
Like equality of opportunity, anybody with any sense is for that.
That's interesting, because Australia until a few years ago actually seemed more resistant to many of these DEI ideas that had swept the rest of Anglosphere. But now the country's almost trying to make up for it by going overboard in its equity and diversity policies. That includes things like an entire government agency called the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, whose stated purpose is to increase the representation of women in Australian workplaces. I think for an Australian TV audience that may not necessarily be as familiar with Jordan Peterson's ideas. Perhaps his direct opposition to DEI policies came across as harsh and overblown. But anyone that knows how collectivism and oppression Olympics of this kind have led in the past, they understand how we're playing with fire doing that. For example, in the ABC News diversity policy document this journalist just mentioned, there's also a requirement for the channel to have at least 15% of its senior executives from non-English speaking background. According to census data and estimates, that number usually hovers between 15 to 18% in the Australian population, meaning that there will inevitably have to be some kind of sacrifice to merit along the way to meet such a tight criteria. And when a corporation starts to be more concerned with moral and political posturing rather than profit and quality of their product, that is when they start digging their own grave. We've seen the last year with the Bud Light controversy, where the company almost lost $1.4 billion due to the boycott. That's also something that proponents of DEI policies just don't seem to get. Quotas or positive discrimination for someone is accompanied by negative discrimination against someone else. And when people lose trust whether their hard work is really all that matters and not their race or gender, that's where you have a society, corporate sector, and a country losing the value that their best minds can bring. Jordan Peterson is all too aware of this, having spent several decades studying how it pans out to the extreme in history, as well as how his own country of Canada is taking dangerous steps in the direction of DEI. And perhaps there's a warning that Australia can take from it. I think this conversation, even though largely playful and lively, points at something much darker brewing underneath that young Australians need to keep an eye out for. If they lost the fundamental values of true colorblindness, meritocracy, and equality of opportunity, that would be the start of the decline of yet another country that is cherished for its culture and values.